What's good with the YouTube, a convict's perspective? It's your boy Flacco coming at you live and direct. What's good with everybody out there? Happy Valentine's Day. I hope you guys stay blessed with your loved ones, and that you guys are staying out there solid, positive, and making an impact in your life out there. So on today's episode, what we're going to be discussing is Corcoran SHU. Now, I have a long, extensive history. I've done 3 terms in Corcoran SHU, all the way back to the 90s, all the way back to the late 2000s. So I have a lot to share about my personal experiences and the different transformation as far as how the corporate staff would react and as well as the different functions within the NF and MA and Sureños and the ABs and BGF. And it was by the time I left there, everything had totally changed compared to when I first got there in the 90s. So this facility, let's go back to its history in order for you guys to understand a little bit about Corcoran. I'm sure you guys know a little bit about its past, but it opened up around 1988. And at that time, a lot of the validated gay members were all from different facilities where they were housing validated members were all being sent there, right? And there was implementation at that time. I think Tibbs was the one that ordered it. And this is when we first started to sport the Mongolian haircut, because a lot of Sureños were shaving their heads. And at that time, the reason why we were having the Mongolian is when different NF and structure members were coming to Corcoran SHU, we'd be able to identify members and be able to communicate once we got there. Because not everybody was knowing who was who at that time, because everybody was scattered through different facilities. Most people would know who was on the NF membership list, but there was also a lot of individuals that were structured, that were the NR. And so at that time, man, around the late, I think early 90s, I think it was, CDC implemented an integrated policy. And what was going on with that integrated policy is they were forcing other groups to go out to group yard at the time. Now, let me describe how the Corcoran SHU was back at that time before they put the dog kennels in. So basically, when you go to yard, there's a sally port, right? That you go through the sally port, and then you come out, you put your arms behind your back, the guard takes off your cuffs. And then there's 2 yards, and they're almost like diamond-shaped yards. They go like this. And in the back, there's one shower. There's a division in the middle, and there's another yard on the other side. So when you would go through that door, they would pop the yard, and you would go to whatever assigned yard you were supposed to be going to. And see, at that time, what they were doing with the integrated policy it was the gladiator days. They were setting people up. They used to literally, say you'd go out to the yard, right? There'd be maybe four white dudes, 3 Southerners. Next thing you know, they're putting you and your cellie out there. And as soon as you go out there, you're going to get off. And then they would CTQ you for 10 days, right? And what the staff used to do at that time is they were basically bidding on inmates while they fought. And then they would use basically ammunition to shoot at people. So a lot of people started to lose their lives. And a lot of these yards, they were fighting it, and it kept on going all the time. So it would be common to for every 10 days, once you go to yard, you never knew who you were going to go out to yard with. And see, from my understanding, the staff used to yell out loud, "Let's get ready to rumble." And what they would do is they would pick and choose who was going to those yards. Sometimes it would be 2 Southsiders out there, just 2 Northerners. Sometimes it'd be 2-on-1. Sometimes it would be 6 Southsiders. They'd send out two Africanos. It never seemed, either they kept the numbers even, right, when it came to the Norteños and Sureños, or a lot of times the Sureños would be deep out there more, or in the Gavachos as well. But it all depended on who the administration was that was running these yards. And see, if you had a bad rapport as far as with the correctional staff, say you were a head case, you were always getting into it with them, you were being disrespectful, they would literally set you up and put you out there on the wrong yard. And this was going on for years, right? Until there was a death that occurred, I think around 1994, that they tried to do a cover-up, right? And see, things started to change at that time in the late 90s, before I got there. They started to separate, they went back to separating everybody, and what they would do was, they would have the northern black yard and the southern white yard. In the validated blocks, they would have the northern structure, NF, BGF yard, and then they would have the Mexican Mafia and Aryan Brother yard. So times had totally changed by the time I had got there. Now, Corcoran has a long, extensive history because they also have what you would call the PHU, which is a protective housing unit, which is high-powered individuals like Sirhan Sirhan, Charles Manson, all kinds of other individuals, Rodney Lucky Shelton, other individuals who were considered high power either cases or dropouts, those that had testified and that where their lives was threatened. Because at that time, you didn't have SNY yards. You would have yards that maybe were considered soft, and that's by how CDC administration established it. Like CMC East was one of those facilities where there was a lot of dropouts out there in the yard. But it wasn't always like that. And so you also had a lot of high-power individuals that went through there too. I mean, Joe Peg Leg Morgan from the Mexican Mafia, he passed away from cancer there in 1993 when he got transferred down there from the Bay. So Corcoran has always had an extensive history. And the thing is about Corcoran, right, is back then you had a lot of redneck correctional officers, right? So they were corrupt, man. I mean, the two places where you would have that, either High Desert, Pelican Bay, and Corcoran. And what they do is they thrive on these communities as far as this is their source of income, because the prison administration, it basically, it gives jobs and employment to a lot of individuals. You have free staff, you have MTAs, you have doctors, you have nurses, you have outside plumbing, all these things that technically inmates used to do back then in the 90s. Now they had to hire free staff because there'd be so much conflict on these yards. So that's the extent of it. So that was a big issue with all these stage fights. A lot of people had lost their lives. They were popping doors open. I've seen that personally when I was there, and I'll go into that in a little bit. And people were spearing each other. It was a very treacherous place. Like I said before in other testimonies and other interviews, there was no positive interactions with other races at that time. It was funk. If you were a Sureño and I was a Norteño, there's funk. There's no basically common courtesy. We already know we're not going to disrespect each other on the tier. If we get a chance, doors pop, we're going to get busy, And that's the mindset that we had over there in Corcoran SHU. So let me go into a little bit about my personal experience. So I ended up getting validated in, I think it was 1999. And when I first got to that facility, it was a total trip because they pull you into a bus. And when you get off the bus, what they do is they tell you to look straight up. They put your hands literally on your neck, and they'll tell you, if you move, we'll break your damn neck. And what they do is they're unshackling because you're in waist chains off the bus. And they're immediately putting you into cuffs. So it's basically a fear tactic. They're letting you know that we're not playing this game here. And they've had a tendency to do a lot of abusive situations towards inmates. Like there was a situation that happened in Calipatria when the Crips rushed the center complex, and the Crips put hands on the correctional officers. Man, they hurt them bad. So when these individuals got to Corcoran SHU, majority of them were transferred all on the same bus, and basically all these dudes got the business. That's how corrupt these correctional staffs were at Corcoran. They did not play around. And so from there, once they put you in cuffs, you go right to where the visiting room is, right there off the thing. And you go there, you go through all the different process to see medical and talk to classification. And they already have your whole C-file. They already have everything about you. And they're either going to try to find to see if they have a space in the validated block where you're going to, or they're going to send you to another building. And see, me, I was validated, but I was endorsed to Pelican Bay. So I was there, supposed to be there on a layover. So the first unit I went to was, I think it was 4A2 left. I think it was at the time. I'm not too sure. And there was two homeboys in there. There was a Crip downstairs named Seville from a villain from Compton. And then there was two Damus in there, and the rest were all Sureños. And eventually they ended up moving the homeboy that was there in that pod to a whole nother unit. So next thing you know, I'm in the pod by myself. I'm trying to communicate with these other homeboys that are there. I'm sending all my information. But it was kind of a trip, I had a better relationship with the Crip that was downstairs than I did with the homeboys that were in that pod. And like I told you guys before, Charles Manson had came through, and that was a trippy situation, man. That dude was over there telling, when the blacks would come in, a new arrival, he would be telling them, hey, cell 7, it's cell 9. I'm the shot caller for the blacks. I'm going to get at you on a kite. And no one took that dude serious, man. He was just catting off, man. But, the extent of mail that he was getting on a daily basis was crazy. And so I guess there had been a situation where these Damus had guess, mouthed off to some Sureños. So they were next to the shower. And so upstairs, it's a little bit different. Downstairs, you have regular doors, right, with the glass and all that stuff. Whereas upstairs you have the cage doors with the little holes, right? So you can throw stuff through there if you want. So when these guys went to showers, they basically gassed the cell. And so it was a little different. My first time I was there, it was different than when I went there later. Because what staff would do was every movement was controlled movement. They were feeding us right. They were doing all the security precautions because the FBI had them under investigation and they were going to trial. So the interactions that they had there, they weren't as corrupt and they weren't doing any scandalous stuff like they were before. And so when I was there, you start to put in for law library to try to communicate with other blocks. This is how we go through that whole process, right? And from there, what was going on? Like I said, that war was continuing to go off. It was called Cold War, they called it, between the Africanos and the Sureños. And I elected not to get involved in that because, I don't play that gassing game. They wanted to start throwing piss on the tier when people shot their lines. They wanted to start stealing kites. And regardless if you're my opposition, if I can't put a hole in you or I can't come with these, I'm not going to go through that process. We'll wait. Let the door be the bell. That's always been my thinking because eventually you're going to get those situations where your door does pop open. And that has happened. I mean, I'll go into that later on. Okay, so from there, as I was going on, I had a good report, but I got moved to a whole other block. And I think I went to 4B3 left. And see, at that time, you only had 2 validated blocks. It was 4B4 left and 4B4 right. So when I got to this block, they were just opening it up as a new game validated block they were supposed to. That was the whole incentive and program of it. And so when we got there, we started to establish a line with a couple of the Africanos. We had a roll call. I was doing the roll call. And I was put in charge of the building by default, right? You had Suave from Salinas, Armando Heredia was there. You had Paul Giron, K9 from Sakura, myself, and then you had Isidro Chilo Moreno. So that was 2 C's that were there and 2 B's. And so Suave was working up with me as far as running the building. So I had to deal with Chilo and all that. Next thing you know, all these brothers get out of there. So next thing you know, Chilo ends up leaving. He ends up getting moved to 4B4 left. And so I sat there and I stayed over there for a minute. And it was a whole different environment, man, because I had gone through it, the last facility, to where administration was using oppressive tactics towards us. They would mess with my mail. They wouldn't give me what I had coming. And the first thing I had, they gave me a bad tail at Corcoran. And I was ready to lock up on the thing. I told the home, I go, man, I'm not going to tolerate for this from the cops. And Chilo had to tell me, like, nah, man, we got to deal with these cops a little bit more diplomatically because if we start causing issues, it could have an adverse effect on every homeboy. He goes, we'll get at the right cop later on. Just deal with it. So I dealt with it, ended up getting what I had coming. But that's the kind of type of tactics that were there, like that was, you seen with other races, man. Like I seen Africanos when they would get disrespected by a CO, a particular CO, what they would do is they would hold that tray. And so they have to come for that tray. It has to be accounted for. So next thing you know, you'd have a big cell extraction. This one Africano, I think he was from Watts. I want to say, what was his name, man? T-Bit or something like that, man. This one CO used to always disrespect him, so he decided to hold his tray. And unfortunately for him, they came in straight geared up, man. Gave him 2 chances, brought a psych in to talk to him. He wasn't locking it up. So before they did that, they came in, boom, pepper spray up in there. They went up in there and they beat that dude dirty. You know what I mean? Even after I could hear from the cell, T-Bit was yelling out, I resist, right? Which, I mean, technically, if I'm going to go that route, I'm not going to say nothing. I'm just going to take what I got coming. And they kept on at it, man. They must have been beating him for about 3 minutes. Right? And they'd also have like J-Cats in there, and they have known for gassing and spitting. So what they would do with these individuals, if you were a head case like that, they would put this little net over your head anytime you had to go for a movement. So if you wanted to get your showers, or if you wanted to go to yard or anything, they put this net on your head because you were a threat to either be gassing or biting or whatever type of deviant behavior that you had as far as conducting yourself. I mean, some people in there act like J-Cats, right? And so from there, I went from 4B, 3 left, I went to 4B, 4 left. And that's when I got plugged in with all the carnales that were there. Carlitos, Wino, Ashali was there, Smilon, Sombras, Tigre. There was a lot of NF members, and there was Smokey from Salinas was there, and there was a lot of bros there too as well. You know, a lot of solid homeboys. So the program was a little bit different, and at that time the Africanos, we had a roll call with them because there was a BGF cat downstairs from me named Yerdo, right? And the interactions, we had respectful interactions with the Sureños. Like I mentioned, I had Night Owl and Conejo. I had M.A. Darrell, who ended up beating his case because of a DNA that didn't match his DNA on his murder case. He ended up getting out, I heard, years later. And I used to trip because all the Sureños were just basically like, when they did roll call, he was first. You know, saludos, they were always sending them to him. So it was kind of a trip how the admiration and respect that they had for him. Whereas opposed, we didn't really interact like that to show more respect towards an NF member or anything like that. We tried to be more incognito in our actions. You also had the AB there, Aryan Brotherhood Pirate. And the AB used to actually help us fish from with Carlitos and Wino. We used to have to yell for the individual named Whitey, who was an AB member. So that's how we communicated as far as sending our lines through the doors, because it's a little trick because you have basically three pods. You have one with cells 1 through 20, then 21 through 40, and then 41 to 64, which I guess the C pod, I guess you would call it, would be a little bit deeper. And so at that time we still had group yard, but because at that time I had 3 incidents within, I think, 6 months before I got there. I had a melee and I had 2 assault and batteries. So they send your C file, right? When you went to ICC, they would recommend a yard, then they would review your C file. And so they deemed me too violent to go to group yard. So I ended up having to be on walk alone. But it was all good though. I even told the homies when they did that, I said, man, because this was the first time they started doing that. I said, this is what they told me. And I sent them the paperwork. I said, I'll do whatever you want. You know what I mean? Like, I'll hold my tray, I'll board up, which board up means you'll put your sheet in front of the door. You know what I'm saying? These are different tactics, you know, like, as well as if you get cuffed, you get a chance, you pull your cuff in. That's when you want to sit there and get off with the cops. That's when you're trying to create an issue or get the attention of a captain, because before they extract you, they bring the lieutenants and captains all in there to address your issues, right? So, basically, we had the policies that we had at that time. We had more interactions with the BGF at that time. I think around that time, somewhere around that time before I left, I think Monster Cody got there, and there was an issue with him because of the book that he had wrote. And the homies on the yard had issues. They didn't want him going to group yard. But this had nothing to do with us. This had to do with the Africanos having to deal with their own. I don't know whatever came about that issue, but I know the homeboys were talking about it at that time. And so everything was the same. We did a lot of clecha in there. You know, we used to do weaponry diaphragms. You know what I'm saying, to make sure everybody had a piece. You know, paper pedazos, crossbows, you name it. We were making it in there. Education, doing the bonds, the formats. My maestro at that time was actually the NF members took me into their schooling, which was Chilo and Carlitos. They were giving me all that clecha, which was kind of a cool experience because I always respected, had a lot of admiration for Carlitos. A lot of things that I did later on in my career were the schooling that he gave me. You know what I'm saying? I always said he was an NF member that was like a hermano, and in fact, because he cared about the people. Totally different than a lot of these other high-ranking individuals. He always taught me to stand up for your rights. Your laws protect you regardless if it's an NR or NF member. And he had that same mentality to where he stood up at times to other NF members who were in violation of what the laws say. So I go through that. I end up paroling. Prior to that, they were schooling me, Carlitos and Wino, as far as street concepts, because I was set to go out there on the streets. Now, the HSPs at that time, if the door popped, it was, I think we still had a green light with all the other inmates, I think, at that time. We didn't have a red light. If they popped, we were to get busy. You know, at least till they shot at least one time. Right? So fast track a couple years later. Now at this time, like I said, man, they used to take us in cuffs, go from spot to spot. They had group yard, and they were feeding us even better. Now, they ended up winning that case. You know, the officers that were charged, they all got acquitted for abusing their authority. I don't know how. There had to have been some type of politics involved, because they were killing people left and right, man. There's a lot of homeboys that got killed. A lot of homeboys got shot. A lot of Africanos got shot. I think the majority of the people who were getting killed were actually Africanos and Norteños at the time. And I guess there was an issue to where the Kumi didn't want to get involved anymore because they were tired of being set up by the cops, which is kind of understandable because that's the same policy that was implemented up there in the Bay at that time. So when I come back, I get put in the same pod with Sylvester Gomez and AC, Angel Cervantes from Visalia, and Pirates there, Rojo from Simi Valley, Grillo from Pico Nueve, Shotgun and Danny Boy from 18th Street, Casper who's an NLR cat from Visalia, whole bunch of individuals. I can't always remember all the names, man, because my mindset when I was in there, yeah, if I'm there, I'm aware of my whole surroundings, but I kept my interactions just to the select few that were right next to me, and that's how it was there. And so at that time when I was there, it was a whole different policy. Now they were letting us, whereas before they were escorting us, now they had got lazy. And they started popping our doors and letting us go to showers on our own. So you always had to be on your toes. And I've said this many times. I always used to maintain a peace on me at all times, no matter what. Because you never knew what was going to happen. And see, we had a whole different policy. This was different. Whereas last time, it was take flight on the Sureños or ABs or anybody that was an enemy. Now we had a mutual agreement with the Sureños and the AB and everyone that if the door popped open, we were to stand down, right? And in our HHP said, only if you plan to have the means and plans to take somebody out, were we to go engage. So if the door popped open, we were supposed to just come out, stand our ground. If they pop an MA or Sureño or AB or NLR, we acknowledge them. If they don't pose a threat, we don't get busy. But we had another policy that was totally different, which was mutually understood within all the races. Anybody who was not active, whether they were white, black, Sureño, or Norteño, if the door popped open, we were to engage. And so what would happen would be, at that time for the camaradas in there, you had Jacko Padilla, who was in the pod next to me. I used to see him all the time. He was basically in charge of everything, but he had an understudy that was my neighbor, who was shotgun from 18th Street. So every time we would get someone that came in that was no good or solid, we would communicate. Shotgun would do the same thing. He would communicate with Silver, because at that time Silver was the RC of the said facility. And so now instead of having group yard, we had dog kennels, right? And it was totally different. I mean, like, they take you out there for 5 hours, and it's like a little dog cage, man. And to be honest with you, it's cool to go out there maybe for an hour, 2 hours, but after a while, man, 5 hours, there's only so much that you can do out there, right? And it was relatively quiet while I was there. You know what I mean? The Sureños downstairs, they see the differences with them. They used to deal with their dropouts. They used to communicate, talk, be respectful. You know what I mean? And a lot of these dropouts would, come drop them off care packages and stuff like that. And we already knew who was who, whereas our policy, right, which was different. Last time I was there, I didn't go into this, but since I was on walk alone, I was going to yard and there would be dropouts out there. And so I was told to play the dummy role and gather information. So I remember there was that individual demon from Sanjo who has a cop who's getting it from a cholo from behind on his head. So I would have to go out there, and I had clearance to talk to this individual and see what type of information and see anything I can gather, and I would come back and report it. This time in Corcoran, we weren't doing none of that. And the thing that was a trip too was, whereas before we had the Africanos on our roll call, they were no longer on our roll call. And in fact, the Africano that was a BGF downstairs, we had a green light on him because he had disrespected the NF member Chilo from Sajo over some magazines. So it was totally a little bit different, man. And the BGF at that time did not want to sign any of our group grievances because we had group grievances that were going on with the Sureños and the Gavachos in there. And the reason why they didn't want to was because we wouldn't acknowledge this Africano, because we had put a green light on him. And see, that was the other thing that was implemented there in Corcoran SHU was, and I was there for a couple of years, was if we had an issue with someone that disrespected us, we would just green light that individual. Because we had a green light on a Sureño downstairs. I forgot his name. He looked like Shrek. That's all I remember. He was next to an old MMA member named Negro. Not Negro, but Negro. He was old, like in his 70s. Old Mexican Mafia member. And so what ended up happening with that situation, Angel Chavez, AC, who was a unit commander and who was basically set up with silver. He was getting recruited as an NF member at that time. And he had the whole block. Well, this Sureño ended up getting his canteen and signing for it, knowing damn well it wasn't his, right? So when that happened, there was a little bit of interactions between us and the Sureños, and this Sureño said, hey, well, it's not my fault, it's the cops. You know what I mean? And didn't offer to give anything extra or anything in return, basically wanted to sit on it. And so that's the response that we got from the Sureños. They tried to tell him, like, hey, you should be giving this stuff back. But this dude's on single cell status anyways. So we put a green light on him, right? AC ended up getting his package. So we took the green light off of him. But see, that's how everything was kind of operating and working. You know, like I told you earlier, I was discussing about the two Sureños and the dropout Sureño. Now, there was that officer in the gun tower I talked about seeing. He did not like me because every time I came out, the homeboys would want me to stop by and run this kite because it'd be easier. So when I come down for showers to get the razor, or my celly would get the razor at the time, I would go down to where the homie was at to go pass a kite. And so basically we were putting ourselves on Front Street because this cop didn't like it. And it got to the point to where this guard was he actually told me I couldn't shower because I passed. Right? But then again, he would let all the Gavachos and Sureños and even the Africanos pass. So I think he just personally didn't like me for some reason. You know what I mean? It is what it is. So one day I'm going to yard while they're running showers, and next thing you know, I hear pa pa. You know, they're shooting off the block gun in the pod. That dropout Sureño, right, dropped off some stuff in front of these active Sureño cell. They end up popping the door. And so dudes run out and they get this dude. They slice him up real quick, man. I mean, it was all bad. And the first thing I thought was, man, that's what you get, Sing, because he's going to be in trouble for that. You know? Now, like I said, I had a situation, too, where I was in there where my door popped open. And it was me and my celly at the time. I think I was celled up maybe with either Steve-O from Saho or Ziggy from Tula, right? I forget. And there was a Sureño on downstairs, and he was single cell. So they popped the door open. Boom. I come out. He's coming downstairs. And this is the type of respect that we had at the time. And this is when things started changing as far as, I guess, in the direction of end of hostilities. He goes up the stairs. He looks at me. He nods his head. He goes up in the cell. Mucho respecto. I believe it was Lucky. I'm not sure, but so there's different people in cell 20. But that's the type of games that they used to play, as far as up there. And, we had a group 602. We were, like I said, we had a filed against the Green Wall there because a lot of the staff that were there were coming from Salinas Valley, and they were using Green Wall tactics. They were hiding our 602s. They were confiscating legal mail. They were doing a lot of illicit stuff at that time, They were giving us a little more action. Like, they weren't supposed to pop our cells like that and let us walk to the showers or walk to yard. But they were doing this stuff because it was easier for them, And so, from my experience, man, Corcoran SHU, man, was off the hook, man. I've seen a couple people stab their cellies. You know what I mean? Individual Casper, he was an NLR member. He ended up almost killing his celly. Couple Sureños, it was funny. They ended up getting whacked. And once they paid that money, they were being brought back. There was individual Sneaky from there that got hit. I think this was, like in 2003 or 2004. He was in our block, and he was now acknowledged. And I used to trip on that. I was like, wow, you almost killed my life to where, man, I almost died. And now you're still going to go back and associate with these people? So I used to trip on that, man. And so There was, like I said, it was a whole different environment. We weren't doing cadence on the yard or group workouts or anything like that, like we do in the regular ASEG units. And Corcoran, they stopped feeding us good, whereas before they used to feed us good, man, and they would do little favors for us. Now they were kind of starting to go back to those old behaviors, man. Like I said, the door started to pop open. A couple people ended up getting speared. You know what I mean? And there was a whole different type of, like I said, different things going on at all times, man. People locking it up. And we used to have different, like for us, we used to have different communications, right? Where when a new arrival, see, we'd always have to go to legal law. And what we used to do was hide a string and bring a cone, right? And that was to fish. So when we'd have to take our kites, we'd have a special code. Like if you were in 4B4 right, the code name would be maybe Sarah. 4B4 left would be Melissa. So you would ask them, hey, who's your ruka? They say Sarah. Okay, boom. I know he's an active homeboy. Or if you seen a homeboy walking and we wanted to get some NA information, we'd be like, oh, hey, Melissa sends hers. You know what I mean? Such and, you know what I mean? Whoa. And we'll give the information, someone's basic information. We'll say, okay, Mark Gonzalez, man, silent from Tracy, sends his to Sarah. So basically that gives them enough information to basically run an NA check, cross check. In the HHPs, I mean, basically the Klecha program was the same as anywhere else. You wouldn't get cleared till you finished the HHPs. In Corcoran SHU, like I said, I was in charge of one block one time when it first opened up. And I think the last time I was there, well, not the last time I was there, I was only there for 30 days because I was just on a dry out run. But I was the maestro there for all the North Daniels and all the Northerners. And there was an NR member that I had just pulled in San Quentin named Roy Atwell, so I got to do his education. And they had a whole different phase that you had to go through. Some had to go through a basic mainline concept. Some were going through bonds, format, history, warfare tactics. And it wasn't like how it was at other facilities to where you have one topic, your whole collection class is running and doing their spills. So this was a lot of work for me. And then I had to do my little reports to the NF on each one's caliber, you know what I mean? And grade them. What did I feel about their conduct? What did I feel about their effort? What potential did I see? Were they resourceful? It was a whole different kind of interesting. So every week I'd have to file a report based upon all the collection assignments that I've seen. And so I would also engage in other types of spills and directives. I wrote a 122 filter out when I was there. There was always some type of work that I always had to be doing, And so I'd be constantly writing. On top of that, man, being in the block that I was with a fellow, the RC of the said facility, I was holding all the Pinto logs and all the NF complaints because I was trusted at that time to hold all that stuff. And so 24/7, I'd have to have that hooped. And see, that's the thing in prison, man. When you're in there, man, there's a lot of things that we have to do that, you know what I'm saying? It's not the lifestyle, man, but it's just, this is how we live. You know what I mean? Having a piece on you, you know what I mean? Having that hooped, you know what I'm saying? One of us is going to be, since I had all the plugs, the cellie would have the piece. You know what I mean? That's just how it's going to be because you never know when it's going to kick off. Anytime, any sign of any type of disrespect, we know if the doors pop, it's going to crack off. Fortunately for me, when I was there, one time anything happened, it was basically degenerates that the doors were popping on. Or the people were taking care of their own mess. I didn't really have any incidents like that where the door popped, where it was cracking off or kicking off or anything like that. But so yeah, that's the second time I paroled from there, and it was an interesting experience because that's the first time I knew a lot of the NF laws because I previously was going through a lot of the indoctrination before through the Carnal Huicho, and a little bit through Wino was telling me little things and plugging with different C's, but I had never been put to be inducted or anything at that time. So I was a well-rounded, respected NR member that everyone knew that I had lines to different NF members. So that they knew when I hit the streets out there, hit the streets from the SHU, I was already plugged in with basically the generals. I knew who to go in contact with. So I was entrusted a lot more. So not everybody always has a solid line. The communications were very hard during Operation Black Widow. So me knowing I'm coming out, and I have access to the SRC as well as the SRG, who therefore has connections to the GOP. A lot of things were being filtered to me, so I had to Xerox a lot of these complaints that were going out against NF members, which I'm not going to go into discussions because I don't want to sit there and start talking bad about NF members, but it gave me the first understanding of how these complaints were filed. So they can go through the proper process to go to the general advocate's office, and if an investigation is needed or someone needs to be put on freeze, or if they can mediate the issue, whatever it may be. But it can't be no frivolous issues what I've seen. And some of these things I was like, wow. I'm told basically, hey, just Xerox this, don't read it. But I'm reading the whole thing the whole time. Come on now. And we were also getting dope in there at the time. And we were getting it basically sprayed on cards. So when we get those coming in, right, every once in a while, I was told, hey, we need to try this and sample to make sure this works before it sells it. I mean, I know it sounds hypocritical, but I mean, sometimes there's trust within the organization. It's not that we condone using dope or anything at the time, but we had to know. So there was a couple of times where we took little papers, me and another person, to test what we got, and we were cleared to do so. It just wasn't told to be put. It was not put out there to be told to any Northerners or North Daniels, because then that would be hypocritical to our bylaws, which says no drug usage. You know what I'm saying? Not saying that we did it a lot, but there was about 2 or 3 times, man. And I could tell you a funny story about that. As soon as I did that, man, I wrote about a 5,000 word wheeler, man, about all kinds of stuff and what I was gonna do. And I sent this to Silver, man. He must have thought I was crazy. You know what I mean? Probably said, I'm gonna cut your water off if anything else comes in again, man. But yeah, that's the extent of how Corcoran SHU is, man. It's a whole different type of environment, man. Like I said, the green wall was real active. They put that Kool-Aid packet on the homeboy that was good at legal law, and they wrote GW on it, or 723. And we had to sign this ridiculous grievance one time, man. And I didn't want to sign it because it was like, it was going after the green wall. Next thing you know, when they run these grievances, 602s, you get interviewed on it. And so next thing you know, me and my senator going out there, and we're like, man, we're shaking our head. They're asking us, do you know anything about 723 green wall? And we're like, man, I don't know. You know what I mean? I didn't really want to even sign it. You know, all I said to them was, I know that your staff are basically directing a lot of attention towards my friend that's in this cell. You know, that's all I can tell you. And the other thing that they used to do too when they took you to ICC was at the end they would ask you, are you ready to debrief? You know, and they try to use tactics. You know, they hold your mail back for like 30 days. You know, sometimes the food comes in cold. I mean, like I said, Corcoran SHU was not cool, man. You know, I didn't get to go through it with the gladiator days, but it lived up to its title. You know, I've seen a lot of fights, a lot of stabbings, a lot of people taking out their cellies. All that stuff happened and occurred there. And see, sometimes they would do these situations, and next thing you know, we're locked down for 2 weeks because, you know, a door popped open, someone got stabbed, or someone got drunk. There was an issue with the homeboy. I think it was Rojo from Dula, and this is when we stopped. Some people get their drinking privileges stopped. Rojo from Dula, and I want to say Little Man, I think from Hanford. They were cellies, man. They got drunk. Next thing you know, Rojo put hands on dude, man. You know, and after that, at that point, they ended up having to have their drinking privileges revoked, and I think they stripped Rojo of his status in his position because he was a squad leader of that said pod. You know. But the Sureños, they operated pretty much the same. They were respectful. The AB were respectful. There wasn't many Africanos in there. But the relationship was kind of strained at that time, man. And but I knew a couple, and we kept it solid, man. I don't know what was going on with that. It just, to me, I always felt like, okay, if there's any issue, I mean, can't we go through it diplomatically to resolve this? But I guess the disrespect or whatever happened between Chilo and this one Africano, it was something that they did not want to let go. Okay. With that said, man, this is a little bit spill about Corcoran SHU, man. Like I said, I always do these raw and uncut at the same time. I don't sit there and write nothing out. So there's probably a lot of things that I missed, but this is going to give you a little bit of insight of how Corcoran SHU operated, my experience while I was there. With that said, you guys have a good one.